hear me okay?
No.
No? Okay. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Billy Johnson, Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Sarasota County. I'd like to introduce our chapter president, Sean Bartelt, who's doing camera duty tonight. And also in the back, we have another Vice President, Rhonda Peters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan policy organization that works to engage citizens, inform and engage citizens in active participation in government. These meetings are not political, but they are educational to inform citizens about areas of common concern in our community and hopefully get you engaged. So tonight, our speaker is Mr. Stephen Swaw, and I'll just refer to my notes. Steve is an engineer with 40 years of experience in public and private sectors in Southwest Florida. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Illinois in Civil Engineering and a Master's in Engineering Administration from Bradley University. He served as Executive Director of Sarasota County's Planning and Development Business Center and as Director of Sarasota County's Stormwater Environmental Utility. He's also recognized as an expert in green infrastructure design. Steve served as chair of the Sarasota County Stormwater Environmental Utility Advisory Committee, co-chair of Sarasota County Environmentally Sensitive Lands Advisory Committee, and vice chair of Mayaca River Planning Advisory Committee. Steve's been recognized with many awards and commendations for his outstanding achievements. First of all, for 35 years of water quality solutions for the Sarasota Soil and Water Conservation District, and also for his dedication, initiative, and contribution to the Environmentally Sensitive Lands Advisory Committee from Sarasota County Government. So Steve, we really appreciate the work that you've done in analyzing the county's stormwater issues, and we look forward to the update on what the county's response has been.
Thank you. Good evening. This is somewhat of an update, I guess. The county had a stormwater workshop with the commissioners last week that I was able to watch this morning to kind of get a sense of it. Some of this I've presented before, but some of it's new. As indicated, I've been in the area for a long time. I'm somewhat semi-retired now, but I'm still doing, I got dragged, into all this because of all the flooding last year, but also doing a lot of work on water quality, and maybe I can come back and talk about that sometime, red tide. But Tropical Storm Debby was pretty devastating, along with the hurricanes we had last year. Made it a very unique and wet year. But I point out that we've had these types of floods before, and we'll probably have them again. The real key, and I tell this to policymakers and staff, is that they need to make sure that every policy, every strategy, every investment they make has the objective of reducing flood damage claims. If we can get through these storms without people getting water in their homes, we win. So that's really the key to flood protection. And we were on a track of having these storms every 30 years until last year. We had one in '62 that was pretty devastating in Philippi Creek, but nobody lived out. Even I don't know if the interstate was even here at the time. It was all pretty much Pinecraft area flooded. In 1992, we had a really bad flood, and Colonial Oaks out near the interstate flooded. There wasn't anything really out east of that on the other side of the interstate, but last year we've got a lot that happened. A lot of developments happened out east that got impacted by that storm. 2022 was Hurricane Ian. That was a 100-year storm in Northport. Mayaca River and Peace River got the most rain they've ever recorded in those watersheds over about 80 years. That rain in Ian really hit out east. It didn't really hit Philippi Creek, but last year that's where the rain was in Philippi Creek and southern Manatee County. When we have these storms, and I go back, my experience with Sarasota County Move this closer. Yeah, just let me know if you can't hear okay. My experience with Sarasota County was some 25 years ago as a stormwater director following the 1992 flood. And I like to think that that was just as catastrophic in many regards in terms of the homes that flooded and how devastating it was. But out of that disaster came the stormwater environmental utility, which established a committed revenue source. You all pay in your tax bill for managing stormwater in this county. It was the first one created, I think, in Florida, maybe even in the southeastern United States. But that money enabled things like the purchase of the celery fields. That was purchased shortly after the utility was established. I think it was purchased in like 1994 as a way to control flooding, to hold water back so Colonial Oaks and Colonial Gables didn't flood as bad. And we all know the story with that. It turned into a great community amenity for the public and for wildlife both, and a way to also improve water quality. There's other opportunities like that in the county. That Donna Bay is another one. There's a large restoration project out there that's probably 3 times the size of the celery fields. And so maybe the county will open that up to the public in the near term as well. But Sarasota also back then came up with the most stringent design criteria in the state of Florida. We designed the 100-year storm in Sarasota. We can talk about that a little bit more too. Developed very detailed hydrodynamic flood models, the first in the state, in the country. It's now become, those models are now the model for the state of Florida, the water management districts, and for FEMA, that basically consider the dynamics of water, especially in low-lying areas that are influenced by tide. It's basically balancing the movement of water at thousands of places in the watershed, depending on what's happening upstream and downstream. And also established an extensive rainfall and water level monitoring program. This is from a t-shirt back then that people wore and filled the commission chambers demanding something be done, and that's why a lot of this was started. We've reached a point again where we need to be looking at what can we do to improve again. So I was going to give a couple context related graphics. This is topography in Sarasota County. The dark brown is high ground. That's around elevation 100, mainly out in northeastern Sarasota County. And you can see as you head both south and west, the ground gets lower and lower and lower, where the lowest ground is down near Englewood and the Myakka River. A couple things I'll point out just for reference. This is the old Bee Ridge landfill, Rothenbach Park. You can see how high it is based upon the color. This is the current landfill. This is Philippi Creek right here, and what we used to be called Philippi Slough. It's kind of a valley through here. This is where the celery fields is. This is Mount Selby right there, as a matter of fact, that dark area. So this reflects some of the historical and current elevation signatures. Florida became a state in 1847, one of the first, or 1845, I believe. One of the first things that was done is the federal government sent surveyors out to figure out every square mile. That survey basically became the basis for every legal description that's been done ever since. Your subdivision, your lot is all tied to this original survey. One of the interesting things the surveyors did is when they crossed a waterway on these section lines, is they mapped water, wetlands or streams. And so when you put all that checkerboard together, these are every one of those squares is a square mile. And when you put all that together, you can see where the waterways were back 150 years or so ago. This is Philippi Creek. It pretty much stopped at where Bobby Jones is today. In fact, this is Bobby Jones. This is shown as a marshy area. This is the celery fields. This large system out here is Cowpen Slough. Used to go to the Myakka River here. This is up in the park. But Sarasota County basically just had a series of about a dozen or so little tidal creeks, and that was really the essence of the drainage along the coast back then. Another historical signature that I kind of tells the same story. This is historical soils, and these are color coded by the type of habitat generally that it is. Green is kind of pine flatwoods or prairie flatwoods. The blue are wetlands and river streams. Yellow are kind of the high ridges, the sand dunes, if you will, which pretty much cluster around some of the waterways and the coast. And an interesting is to superimpose the survey and the soil maps, and they kind of confirm each other. Again, this is Philippi Creek watershed historically. Bobby Jones. So you can see that the surveyors were identifying marsh areas where the soil maps were saying, yeah, that's a blue wetland type area. We had a couple of these large areas out in Philippi Creek watershed. This is the Summery Fields, and this is another very similar area further out east where Laurel Meadows currently is, that area. It used to be in Cowpen Slough. It used to drain down this way. What happened about 100 years ago in the 1920s, 1930s is the Sarasota Fruitville Drainage District was created as a taxing district for constructing drainage for agriculture. The Fruitville Drainage District gives away what they were trying to grow, like celery and other fruits. But this was again the original Philippi Creek, and you can see the extensive canal network, which is a big connect with blue dots, drain the wetlands, get it all out, get it drained, and Philippi Creek got straightened out, got deepened. And so there's an enormous amount of fresh water that used to just collect on the landscape in the wetlands that now was taken out into the estuaries and the bays, dramatically changing the freshwater saltwater interface of those estuaries. This was happening all over the state. It was called land reclamation at the time, believe it or not. But this was primarily for agriculture at the time, 100 years ago, converting the Summery Fields to a production for agriculture. And this is what some of those drainage canals looked like. They were not natural waterways. They were cut through uplands and to connect with large wetland areas to drain them. But you can kind of see the scale of it with the individual standing here back in 1929. This is the Summery Fields in the 40s. You can see the muck for agriculture. This is that's why they targeted it. It had very organic, rich soils for growing things. And this is the area out east of the Summery Fields, very similar in soil type and what was being done with it in terms of agriculture. So this is the 100-year floodplain that you hear about. This is what I worked on this back 25 years ago, identifying all the flood-prone areas with all the computer models and whatnot. But one of the things that I noticed when I did this was that although these areas, these low-lying areas were drained by the Sarasota Fruitville Drainage District or mosquito control or other activities, when you got a lot of rain, they were wet again. That's where water wanted to collect. It was low-lying. You can drain them under normal conditions, but if you get enough rain, they'll go underwater again. So a lot of these areas, again, this is Philippi Creek, this is what they call Philippi Slough, Summery Fields, Bobby Jones, the area out east. This large area here is Cowpen Slough floodplain. And I should mention that when they built these canals to drain this area and pull this water that was out here to the west and into Philippi Creek, a dike was built to hold all this other flood water back in Cowpen Slough so that they didn't have to take on that water too. So this is basically was probably constructed about 100 years ago or so. I've never really found a record when this was built, but there's a dike was built to separate the water on Cowpen Slough from Philippi Creek. This is the computer model. This is the intricacy of the computer model. Each red dot is a location where flood elevations are computed. It could be a lake, it could be a wetland, it could be a ditch segment where a pipe is. And all those red dots are interconnected by something that's helping drain it from one spot to another. Could be a ditch, could be a pipe, could be a weir control structure. And again, the 100-year floodplain, this is the Philippi Creek Basin. But as a modeler, I'll be the first to acknowledge that all models are wrong, some are useful. What that means is the models are only as good as the data that you have. to run them with. And so this is based upon, these blue areas are based upon predicting what would go underwater if we had the design 100-year storm of 10 inches in 24 hours. If you have more rain than that, or it's distributed over a longer period of time, you would have to rerun this model with that rainfall for it to be accurate. This is not, it's only useful for that rainfall event. But, and this is a little blurry, but the detail of these flood maps is pretty clear. I mean, you can zoom in on these, and you can see the homes that are built out of the floodplain. They may be in the floodplain. The streets are all underwater. The lakes are all underwater, but the homes are built up higher than the floodplain. But these go right down to the street level. You can actually see the streets that are flooding. Okay, the county has a lot of data that's not really that available to the public. That's one of the recommendations that I had made to them, is that they really need to get their data out to the public and more accessible. One of the things that they have done is identify what they call hotspots. These are areas where they know they've had problems, pipes that get blocked, debris just areas that are susceptible to drainage getting blocked or a problem. Their protocol calls for them to go out, I believe 2 days before a storm is supposed to come in, and inspect all of these and correct them if there's a problem there. But they know that there could be problems here. One of the things I point out is this big area in the middle of the county that's pretty devoid of hot spots, and that's Palmer Ranch. Palmer Ranch, I'm real familiar with because I worked on a lot of it, but they were the first ones. We used these models back when Palmer Ranch started, and when we had the 1992 flood, it also showed very similar. It didn't have a lot of the problems. So I convinced the county after that flood that we could do that for the whole county. We could basically assess the entire county with these detailed flood maps and evaluate development accordingly in that context. So for Tropical Storm Debby, we're fortunate that Sarasota County and Manatee County have a pretty extensive rainfall gauge network. These are not just rainfall tubes that measure rainfall. They're actually measuring continually on a tipping bucket so that we know, these are all of them in this region here. So there's probably, I think there were 18 different rainfall gauges. And they're all pretty similar. They all, I mean, within a certain range, they indicated we got anywhere from 11 to 12 inches in the heart here, and then it increased in these outer bands. So it was kind of interesting that the lower rainfall totals measured were actually kind of in the middle of Philippi Creek, but as you got up into the outer edges of Philippi Creek and into the Braden River up in Manatee County, the rainfall increased to 14 to 15 inches. The other thing that was interesting when I looked at how all that rainfall, how was the rainfall distributed, okay? So the rainfall fell over about a 3-day period from Debby. And so this represents actually 3 days. So one day is 0.33 and the second day 0.67. You can see that the majority of the rain fell within that second day. But it was a pretty continuous slope. The rainfall that we designed for is a very steep slope, like this. So it was a lot of rain. We had about 1 inch in the first 24 hours, then about, I think about what, 10, 11 inches in the second 24 hours, and then about 1 inch in the last 24 hours. The county also has a lot of places where they measure how high the water gets. So we looked at those. I ran the model with the different rainfall all over Philippi Creek to see how good the model predicted. And in some places it was pretty good. In other places, not so good. And some of the gauges, this is the gauge, obviously malfunctioned. This gauge malfunctioned significantly. This is down at Pinecraft. And we know that the flood levels down there got up to 14 because the county surveyed them. After the fact, the debris lines that went on the survey. The model underpredicted it by 2 feet, but their gauge was 4 feet low. It just malfunctioned. So this has been a reoccurring problem I've noticed with the gauging. they have a lot of malfunctioning. No one's really taking care of this information like it probably should be. So they weren't even aware of this malfunction until I pointed out that the flood level had been 4 feet higher. So the model was able to predict pretty reasonably what would happen. And one of the interesting things is that those blue areas, those floodplain areas, those valleys, celery fields, what I call Philippine Slough, this graphic is showing, the red dots are indicating where the flood levels were higher for Debby than they would have been for a 100-year storm. The green dots are showing where they would have been, where they were lower for Debby than the 100-year storm. So what was happening, I think largely because of the way the rainfall was more gradually distributed for Debby, is the upper areas of the watershed drained off pretty well into the lower areas. And that's where the water just accumulated because it couldn't drain out fast enough. So that we call these red areas volume sensitive. And so really looking at, this is helpful because those are the areas that we really ought to be concerned with is this volume sensitivity of these low-lying areas and how we might look at designing in the future in Philippine Creek or Cowpen Slough. Mayaca River would look very similar. Mayaca River is very sluggish, doesn't drain efficiently, so it's more sensitive to the more rain that falls, the higher flood levels they're going to get. And then I want to explain this too. This is kind of interesting. This is a graph. All the blue represent how much rainfall was converted to runoff, the amount of rainfall that is going to be able to get off the landscape into the bay and carry things. So it's actually indicative of rainfall, but it's really the rainfall that gets off the land into the bay that causes flooding. And these blues show the magnitude in acre feet of that every year going back to 1992. This was a big flood I mentioned. The red bar and the yellow bar are building and content damage claims. So you can see how significant that was back in 1992. And even though we've had other big storms in 2003, 2013, the flood damage claims were on a nice decline. That's because the county did invest a lot of money in different flood projects. But last year, we had the highest runoff of record going back to 1992. This is not complete. They haven't gotten all the flood damage claims in for 2004. This is going to be a huge number, I'm sure. But this, I think, gave a lot of people, including probably the county and residents, kind of a false sense of security. I've felt for the last several years that we're going to get one of these storms again, and people are not going to realize that they're going to be shocked, including the county. And I think they were by what happened last year. So it's an opportunity. We need to kind of reset and figure things out. This is a graphic that the county produced for the commission, and I think it's pretty telling. The pink is where the county went out after Debby and noted where there was possibility based on what they were seeing of damage, flood damage. And the blue is the theoretical 100-year floodplain, which is pretty close or greater than what happened to Debby. And you can see they overlap. So the message here is when you put more people in flood-prone areas, you're asking for trouble. This is where you're going to have the problems. Okay, so a couple other things that from the investigations that I did. So the county called me the week of the flood and asked if I would do an independent review, and I thought about it over the weekend and told them I would, but that I didn't really. I'm retired. I don't need the money that badly, so I told them I would do it for free so that there was no perception that they were telling me what to say or that I was saying what they told me. And they were understanding of that, and they gave me access to resources and staff. I was able to meet with whoever I needed to and get information, get surveying when I needed. But one of the things I noticed that weekend was all the news, all this news on Laurel Meadows was devastating. I couldn't believe that this flooding was so severe out there. It didn't make sense to me. And I got to thinking about that dike that I mentioned between Cowpen Slough over here and Philippi Creek over here. This red line represents where that dike is. And from my experience, I just knew that the flood levels on this side, on the east side of the dike in Cowpen Slough, were several feet higher than they are on the west side of Philippi Creek. And so I said, you know what? If that dike breached, that would explain where all that water came from in Laurel Meadows, which is right here. Because it came in after the rain stopped, actually, and it was just overwhelming, just an overwhelming amount of water. They're kind of at the limit of the watershed, so there should be that much water that could contribute to that otherwise. So I let the county know on Monday, the following Monday, I said, I have a hypothesis that the dike breached somewhere. And they, a couple weeks later, somebody from Laurel Meadows posted this video of a car traveling on Delph Road heading west, and you can see the water's flowing in this direction, dropping over the road. This is south, this is north. Well, that is Delph Road, that location's right here. So I said, well, there it is, that's where the water is coming in. So the dike breach has to be south of that. And I told the county, they called me up and said, we're gonna go out and look for the dike, where should we go? I said, go to the end of Delph Road and head south. And I think you'll find it. And by the end of the day, they did. And they sent me a video, and it was right here, and they got a survey. We actually went back onto the LiDAR, which is, you've probably seen LiDAR on National Geographic. They are able to identify old civilizations now in woods from this stuff. But this dike actually showed up on, I think it was a 2018, 2019 LiDAR, so it'd been there a while. And based upon the vegetation and the video that the county sent me, yeah, it'd been there a while. Because what I saw was really, really woody bushes, okay, just really dense. This dike had been ignored. It was so overgrown. It was like a jungle. And so, but there was no foliage on the plants, because the water had just gushed through there. And the bottom, there was no understory, it was just sand. So it was clear that a lot of water had moved through there recently, and it had been out there for a while. The good news is the county went out, cleaned it, fixed it, and got it repaired right before Helene hit. And I think it was really important to get this information out to the people in Lower Meadows, because they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix their homes and asking, I'm sure, how do I know this isn't gonna happen again? And so I wanted to let them know that, hey, this is what happened, and it's not an expensive fix, and the county has been able to fix it. The celery fields was another thing I noticed, that there's gates here that the county has that control the water all the way back up in the celery fields. Their protocol says don't close those gates unless certain extreme things happen that really I don't think did, but they closed them completely and backed a lot of water up into these offices and businesses up in this area in particular. And then finally, we've heard about recently Philippi Creek. And this was a long time coming. It's probably 20 years of, I realize, sediment buildup in Philippi Creek that's been ignored. And it came home to roost in Debby. This segment of Philippi Creek from the mouth at 41 all the way up to Pinecraft, this is Bay Vista, really even up to Beneva Road, which is just up in here a little bit. And that's this segment here. Really the natural creek that had been deepened. An enormous amount of sediment over time is built up in here. These are pictures from some of the residents. The sign says slow speed manatee zone. It looks like a beach, but that's supposed to be water. So the county, and so what I did was, I heard all this testimony at one of the hearings, and I went back and I took from the model what the bottom of the ditch had been surveyed 25 years ago. The model is here. You can see that it's way below sea level, anywhere from 3 to 9 feet below sea level. That's what it was 25 years ago. But it's not even a regular slope, right? It's just oscillating. This blue line represents the mean low tide, okay? So the tide's fluctuating in here. This is normally under, water. But what the testimony was that a lot of the bottom of the ditch was cropping up over the mean low tide. So that meant the bottom had come up this much to that blue line or a little bit above in quite a few places. So out of curiosity, I put all the cross sections back in the model with the bottom corresponding to this blue line, and the flood level that was otherwise predicted here at 12 up at Pinecraft came up to 14, which is where it actually had been observed. So it could very well be that the severe flooding up at Pinecraft was at least in part due to the sediment buildup and the reduction really in the ability for Philippi Creek to handle all the water because it had lost so much cross section. And so they have a dike up at Pinecraft that got overtopped, and they have a stormwater pump behind the dike that of course wouldn't work anymore once the dike was overtopped. So the point is, if this gets cleaned back out, and the county seems very committed to get that finally all that sediment or a good part of it out, the project that they had up there probably would have worked. So real quick, I was just going to touch on the recommendations that I submitted to the county after these findings. The first are operational, recommended that all their databases need to be linked up and more transparent to the community. They also need to have more routine communication with the community on what they're doing in their watershed. They have these 5 watershed areas: Sarasota Bay, Little Sarasota Bay, Donna Roberts Bay, Lemon Bay, and Maca River. So you live in one of those 5 watersheds. I recommended that they need to have town hall meetings every year to go over those watersheds, what's happening. Go over the hot spots that they've identified, see if there's others that people are saying, we've seen problems here. They just need to have a much better way of communicating with people because they're collecting about $27 million a year for maintaining the stormwater system. And what I heard, independent of Tropical Storm Debby, independent of Philippi Creek, which really went across the entire county, is people are not feeling that the county's maintaining the drainage system, even to the level of service that they did 5 or 6 years ago. So they need to get that turned around, of course. The second recommendation, based upon the dike experience, if you will, was that they need to identify what all the dikes are and have them inspected every year as part of by a professional engineer. This is something South Florida Water Management District does as a standard operating procedure. I will say that the first recommendation, I think the county has taken seriously. They've incorporated that into theirs. They have not incorporated the inspection of the dikes. So I'm still going to push for that, that they include that. The third is to reevaluate how they manage the celery fields. I think they've got recommendations into the commission where they're going to be doing that. And I also want to talk about, these are the segments of Philippi Creek where you can see the sediment build up pretty significantly through here. There was an old dam here that would have trapped a lot of the sediment, but because it's not effectual, a lot of the sediment's washing downstream. But this is the one, of all the things that happened, this is the one big project that the county has to take on that came out of that. This is a big deal, but they really, I don't think, have a choice. It has to be done. So they're moving forward with that. And then the final operational recommendation was that given the problem with a lot of their gauge stations malfunctioning, not reporting accurately, that they need to find a way to correct that. And my recommendation is they contract with USGS to manage that system. USGS does this really well. This is what they do. And they have several gauge stations the USGS does in Sarasota County. They would just need to take on some of the counties too. They're the pros. Their stuff is the gold standard. I had a couple, a series of recommendations dealing more with policy or administrative. The first was, I think that the stormwater program for many years I noticed was subbing things out to out-of-town consultants. They've started to take that back in-house, and that's what they need to continue doing. They need to have the expertise in-house, locally,
to manage stormwater. And I think they need to be much more proactive than they've been. And so there's somewhat of a culture shift there that I think needs to happen. And it's not just flood protection. Stormwater is responsible for managing water quality. They do natural systems restoration can be part of what they do, such as the celery fields in Donna Bay, and even water supply now. The state passed new legislation last year that's going to require more water quality treatment for nutrients. And one of the ways to do that is to recycle water from stormwater ponds for irrigation. So there's a water supply element that that even stormwater is going to have expertise in now. Secondly, I think that the county can do a much better job of proactively protecting the significant floodplain areas. The Surrey Fields is the model. That's what they did. They bought a seriously flood-prone area and created it to hold more flood water. In the process, created a wonderful community park and wildlife habitat. So they've done this before, and they could partner with other programs in the county, such as the Environmentally Significant Lands Protection Program, for doing that. Again, that would need to be planning and be proactive. At the same time, as you saw in that graphic, approving more density in flood-prone areas is a bad idea. It needs to be done very, very, with a lot of scrutiny. What has happened over the years is rezonings in flood-prone areas has just been approved and said, well, the land development regulations will take care of it. But all of the flood-prone areas they have are in areas that are floodplain. You can try and fill your way out of it, but if you have more rain than what you're designed for, the houses will flood. This is a large floodplain area example in the Palmer Ranch, that's what they did. They stayed out of it. In fact, they even tried to, put stormwater and wetland recreation in it as an amenity. But there just needs to be more scrutiny before rezones are approved to put more people in flood-prone areas, in my opinion. And then, kind of lastly, I think here is the recognized need that the design criteria is out of date. The criteria that the county uses, the 10 inches in 24 hours, that's based upon rainfall data, I think collected through 1996 or something. So the last 30 years have not been considered in establishing that design criteria. That's really what the Water Management District should be looking at doing. And I heard today that the governing board is going to be considering new design criteria at their meeting next week. They're the experts in it. South Florida already adopted new rainfall 2 years ago, based upon a joint study they did with the USGS. This study that the USGS did for Florida, that was adopted by South Florida Water Management District, included our area. So the study's already been done. Swiftmud, our Water Management District, could review this and say, yeah, we think this is good, and they could adopt it as well. So that you don't have to recreate the wheel to do that, but there's Manatee County's having the same discussion that they think the criteria needs to be updated. So I wanted to close with, are we prepared for Debby? What can you do? Or what can your homeowner association do? I've talked a little bit about, on a large scale, what Sarasota County can do with their stormwater department, but I want to talk about two things you can do. This is a typical stormwater pond that I'll walk through. Usually the water level in the stormwater pond is controlled by a window or a weir in a concrete box, okay? That's what controls where the water level is. Now, you'll get evaporation in the dry season in the next few months, and that water level will drop below that elevation, but that's basically where it's controlled. This area below the pond is what we call permanent pool. It's the groundwater, and that's where you get credit for water quality, which I'm not going to talk about that tonight, but above that elevation is where you temporarily detain water when you get a big storm. And that's controlled by the width of this weir. This weir is sized, the width is sized to restrict how fast water can get out. And this lake is designed to allow the water to surcharge up temporarily to hold it back, so that so that it doesn't flood out downstream. So you're basically restricting the water so that you're not increasing flood levels downstream, and you're providing the surge tank area, whether it's a 25-year, the 100-year storm, and there's usually some freeboard, so that you're controlling. That's how the floods are controlled with these new development ponds. And a lot of these ponds can be linked together by pipes and controlled potentially by just one structure, or there could be many. But this is what the structures typically look like. Anybody know what this metal plate is for? Donna?
Yeah, it's to keep debris, when the water level comes up, it keeps debris from floating in there.
Yeah, debris and oils and greases. It's a skimmer plate to try to keep stuff from clogging up the structure. This is what they're not supposed to look like. They're in there. So, your homeowner association needs to know where these control structures are, if you have stormwater lakes, and keep them cleaned. Because this will clog water, and I mean, I've seen it get so clogged that there's no water going out. And it'll start coming up in your roads and then up in your driveways. So you'll have a lot of problems if the water can't drain from your subdivision, independent of what's going on in the county system. As an individual, know your floodplain. Okay, and this is not an easy thing to do. It needs to be simpler, and I've talked to the county about this. But if you go to the county website or type in Sarasota County floodplain, you'll get this to come up. This is the link. Okay, you can type this link in. Click here, you go to here. Click here, you go to here. And then these are the two links to click on. One is called the flood zone information map, and the other is the community flood area map. The difference is this one is the FEMA maps. These are the federal maps that are used for determining, I guess, if you need flood insurance or not. They're regulatory, but the county also has flood maps, okay? They should be the same. And the goal 25 years ago was that these maps would be identical, okay? I don't know why it's taken so long for that to be the case, but I think for most of the county now, most of Western County and Philippi Creek, the maps are the same as of last March. A year ago, the flood maps, the FEMA flood maps got updated, so now they are essentially the same as the county maps. So it's confusing, and so this is an example of the FEMA maps, the FEMA floodplain, and the Sarasota County floodplain. Okay, and this is an example where, yeah, they're pretty close. They match up pretty well. But the maps that got adopted last year by FEMA are already 10 years old. So anything that's happened in the last 10 years, such as this development, is not reflected. The county knows better because it's all been designed, they've permitted that way. The floodplains are all in the lakes or wetlands or whatnot. But if you live in one of these subdivisions, because of the maps that were adopted last year, you're now finding out you're gonna have to get flood insurance, even though the county knows it's not. So that's been a real headache, and that needs to be, the county really should be correcting this. They basically should be updating the FEMA maps to reflect what their best, more recent information is showing. So once you get into either one of these maps, or the property appraiser's map, you can click on or type in your address, and a page will come up telling you what the base flood elevation is. You can see physically if your lot is in the floodplain, but whether it is or not, you can click on and it'll tell you that you're either not in the floodplain, or if you are, what the elevation is for that floodplain. So I'm not saying that even discouraging anyone from getting flood insurance if you are not in the floodplain. A lot of the Laurel Meadows homes are not in the floodplain, but all of the streets and lakes are. It's clear it's surrounded by water, so it's probably not a bad idea to have flood insurance. Those flood maps don't take into account things like breaches in dikes. That was overwhelming. So Laurel Meadows filled their way out of the floodplain, but not enough if you get an enormous amount of water coming in from another watershed, from a breach. So I'll close with that, and hope we have a much calmer summer than we did last year, and I'll be glad to take any questions if we have some time. Yes, sir.
Hi, yeah, I had a question. If we had an issue with some of the ditches on the trail that are part of the county property, like I live near a new construction in an old home, and one side of the trail near Payne Park, it's like 12 feet deep, 1,000-foot long, giant channel that fills up with water, and our house flooded twice last year, and it was never flooded before. It's like clean crawl space, not anymore. And it's kind of not a matter of if it happens again, but when. And I called, and it's so obvious that this little grate isn't gonna drain with the new construction and the trail lowering the elevation. It's actually only an inch or two above the lowest point in the trail. So I have pictures of all the water just going over to our side from this giant ditch, and I'm the ditch on the other side.
Yeah, so this is Heritage Trail,
The Legacy Trail.
Legacy.
The
Yeah,
Legacy
right,
Trail.
right by where it ends at Payne Park.
Yeah.
So there's some new construction there. I have pictures that would take less than a minute to show, but I just don't know. I called and contacted, and outside of them putting up, a little picket during the hurricane that just blew over on top of the grade anyways. I don't know what to do outside of going out there and sump pumping it before a big storm comes every
So have
time.
you talked to both the city and the county, or just the county?
Mostly the county, because
Yeah.
I don't know who else to.
The county, so the county right now is seriously discussing,
There's an interlocal agreement between the city and the county, where the county manages, they tax people in the city for stormwater, the county does, and they have an interlocal agreement to maintain the drainage in the city. The county is talking seriously about disconnecting that agreement, and the city's gonna be on their own. Now, they collect right now, I think the county collects about $4 million in 2017, comes from residents of the city. So the city, if they take it over, that's the kind of revenue they have, but I think part of the problem, I think, is that there's a disconnect between the county and the city right now, and it's growing wider and wider. And it might be worth talking to the city, because I think they're gonna end up having to take and I think they know it. They've had meetings, the county and the city, on this issue, and the city seems to be resigned that it's gonna be the case.
Understood. Mind if I show you afterward, 30
Yeah,
seconds, so you
absolutely.
can tell me what they might
Yes.
do if they were to actually do something about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Even in recent developments such as Laurel Meadows, the street drains began overflowing backwards because they're designed, of course, to go into the local retention ponds. So my question is, once that begins happening in communities, are streets engineered to drain in any way, or is it just a free-for-all at that point?
So,
Would you repeat the question?
okay, so the question was, in subdivisions like Laurel Meadows, it's noticed at times that the water is moving backwards up into the streets. And is there anything that can be done about that, or is at that point, is that just gonna happen? And the answer is yeah. Laurel Meadows was built completely in a 100-year floodplain. They elevated the homes, and they elevated the streets to a certain degree, but I looked at their plans, their engineered plans, and the streets were designed to partially flood. They recognized that the water's gonna come up in the drainage ways. And if you're in a floodplain, this is why floodplain development is so problematic. If you're not in the floodplain, you should always have elevation to move your water from your streets and your driveways and your development down to the waterway. If you build in a floodplain, the water level can get up so high in the county system, because this is what always happened, and it starts seeking that level back through the storm sewer and into the roads. It's so difficult to, in my opinion, to engineer in that kind of situation where the whole thing's a bowl, because you have to get the homes up, but you're not supposed to displace floodwater, because it's like sticking your finger in a glass of water, you're gonna push the water on someone else. So those two things are working against each other. One way an engineer can overcome that partially is by allowing the streets to flood, actually designing it that way, and that's what they did there. One of the interesting things on that, I went back to the, after Tropical Storm Debby, Google Earth flew Sarasota County. And so there is aerial imagery on September 29th, 2022 of the entire county. And if you go out in that east area, you'll see the water was in the roads in Laurel Meadows and a lot of other places, but that's what it was designed to do. Not a good idea, not a good idea. And I think, yeah, the county should not have allowed, it's just not a good idea to do. But that happens if the subdivision is built in a floodplain, the water will start backing up through the, that's the first sign that the floodplain is starting to recoup the lowland.
Could you give us just a quick thumbnail appreciation for what we should do in our communities? How do we know our ponds are functioning correctly? I find that the drains from the streets seem to sometimes back up to where the level at the entrance, or the drain from the street, is almost at the street level, and then it eventually goes down. But it's not going down. If we had a really bad rain, it wouldn't be going down.
Yeah, so the question is, just thumbnail, how can you tell if the drainage in your subdivision is working properly, I guess? Again, this is the most important thing. Know where that control structure is and make sure that it is free and clear. What happens is, if this water level gets up too high, this big blue arrow, that's the storm drains that are all draining into your pond. But water seeks a level. And if your streets are below the red line or the green line, they're gonna be underwater because water's gonna seek that level and be in the streets, okay? So it's not necessarily in a large storm unusual for the water to get up close and into the streets. You may even see it, right at the throat of the inlet. That's the water stacking up in the pond and seeking that level all the way back to the stormwater sewer system into the roads. And then it comes down slowly as that weir allows it out. The problem is if it gets up even higher than that.
Yeah, I guess what I'm really saying is that at times the water level is going above the weir. That means maybe that the piping, interconnecting piping to the next pond, downstream pond, is blocked or not sufficient to carry off.
Well, that can happen. If Debby was more than 100 year in a lot of places. It would have got up over, and there's a grate here. It gets up over that, and now this grate allows it off, and it's more of a free for all at that point. It's not controlled anymore. A lot more water can get out. We can talk more later. Yes, ma'am.
Most of our drainage dishes are on a golf course. I live on Forest Lakes. And so the golf course management is responsible for all this upkeep, and they don't do it. And we, for years, ever since Ian, been trying to get after the golf course management. You're not taking care of the drainage. There's collapsed pipes, and and then calling the county doesn't. Well, it's golf course responsibility. So, how can we as a community, really encourage or make these people, because they don't care, they don't live there, But it's been such a problem, only in the past, with all this crazy flooding.
I had the president of your association come in and see me last week, and she was telling me about some of the side of the golf course. It just seems like there needs to be, and it's been there a long time. There's probably some kind of agreement in place, but that agreement doesn't address these things. But that's where I would start, is look at the agreement that was originally set in place when that subdivision was developed.
In the 60s.
Yeah. But there had to be something, because I think what the president told me was
they can't rezone it, or they can't just build homes there. They
Yeah,
have to
that,
get-
which is what they love to do.
Yes, they
really
would.
could care less about the golf course or
Yeah.
whatever, they keep thinking they're gonna put condos down.
But there's some kind of restriction
Yeah,
or deed restriction
so
where
they
they can't
just
do that.
half-ass manage the golf course.
There has to be, so there is something from the original plat or the deed restrictions, and it should have, and I'm surprised if it didn't, even if it was in the 1960s, didn't address the responsibility for maintaining drainage.
Right.
They really are obligated to do that. I'm not an attorney, you should talk to an attorney, but blocking drainage from upstream